I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow.
Wow, I'm really excited for the turnout. Glad that you all weathered the chilly weather this morning to come out to Fort Garland from wherever you're driving from. I know we've got folks from Alamosa, and I know there's a few folks from Denver here and probably all across the valley. So it's really our pleasure to welcome you. My name is Eric Carpia. I'm the director here at the Fort Garland Museum and Cultural Center. We're really, really excited about today's program. I can't say enough good things about Chloé. I'll do a quick intro before we introduce her, but I just want to share a quick story. I first met Chloé and her wonderful family, Sean and Zoe, who are sitting in the back here. No, Sean's saying, no, don't introduce me. You didn't tell me that, Chloé, that I'm not supposed to introduce Sean. No, I first met them, I think it was in summer of 2023. We had just opened our exhibit, Buffalo Soldiers Revision, which if you haven't seen it, I would invite you to take a peek today before you leave. But it's in the West Officers' Quarters in this building. And that exhibition explores some of the nuanced history of Buffalo Soldiers. And that aren't, for those of you that may not be familiar with Buffalo Soldiers are the first all-black military units established after the Civil War. The 9th Cavalry was stationed here at Fort Garland in 1875 through 1879. Later, we may put a plug in for another collaboration we're doing with Chloé before the end of the summer here. But that exhibit opened in summer of 2023. At the same time, Chloé and her family had just moved to Trinidad, I think, right, around that time. Chloé was working as an artist in residence in Trinidad, doing a project honoring the life of Cathay Williams. Cathay, if you're not familiar with her story, she's the first known female Buffalo Soldier that served. And she has a connection to Colorado, both Trinidad and Pueblo. But Chloé was preparing for this work that she was doing, honoring Cathay, heard about our exhibition addressing similar themes, brought her family down, and just in talking with Chloé and the family and hearing about her work as a historian and an artist and a storyteller, I knew at that moment that we needed to introduce Chloé at some point to the San Luis Valley and wanted to do a collaboration with her. Of course, when these things happen, you kind of look for the right time, right, and the right opportunity. And I'm pleased to say that today is one of those opportunities. It's actually the first exhibition that will be opening with Chloé in 2026. So I know you're going to really love Chloé and her work. The beautiful thing about 12 Tablecloths, and she'll talk about this, of course, is this is chapter 3 in a series of exhibitions under the same theme, which she'll talk about. The beautiful thing about the work that she's done here at Fort Garland is that it is very, very site-specific. It is very much connected to people who spent time here at Fort Garland and have influenced Fort Garland and the San Luis Valley. And again, I'll let her talk about some of that. So I'm super excited. I think there's going to be things that you hear today that you probably not heard before, which is exciting because I think it emphasizes the fact that part of Chloé's work is like sharing these previously unknown stories in a really beautiful way. So with that, I'd like to just introduce Chloé. Chloé is a legally blind artist, curator, and historian committed to creating work that centers equity, accessibility, and healing. In doing so, she seeks to center the importance of shared history and erode the social constructs that oppress people of color and those navigating disability. With over 20 years of experience in intercultural engagement, arts administration, and advocacy, she has traveled to 9 countries and 24 states in support of her work. She earned a bachelor's degree in cultural studies from the University of New Orleans and studied art at the History of Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. So with that, Chloé, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the San Luis Valley.
Thank you. Good morning. You all have blessed my spirit. I want you to know, I did a little something fancy for you. Do you see this boot action? Do you see this? And I'm originally from Louisiana, so I should know better. And I forgot, you got to break boots in. So please enjoy these for the next 30 minutes, and then my sneakers are coming back on. And if you see my family, we're here for solidarity. They also have on boots. That's how much we love you. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for sharing with us. It's going to be a really special gathering. A few quick notes. I had the benefit of doing community-based work in Durango last weekend, and Durango is glorious, but being in Durango and Denver and now the beautiful Valley, my allergies are reacting in a very unique way. So you may see me potentially blow my nose, dab, or maybe cough, and I just want to say, post-COVID, I am not contagious. I am only a vessel today for stories, right? So just wanted to share that. I feel like you have to say that post-COVID. But I wanted to take a moment just to ground us in what today will hopefully be. And in doing so, I wanted to first acknowledge Eric and Josette and Joey and all the wonderful people who work here at Fort Garland every single day to ensure that this is a safe space for stories to be honored and for everyone to feel seen. I also want to thank History Colorado and so many people who have traveled today to share with us for this really beautiful historic occasion, honoring the lesser known experiences of these extraordinary chosen ancestors that we'll talk about today. I also want to acknowledge very briefly, but I have to do this because this person is amazing. You know her, Sandy Ortega. Raise your hand. Where are you? Woo woo! So I want to acknowledge the fact that when I come, as Eric mentioned, my shows are very site specific. Even if I am creating period rooms, which is what I essentially do. My daughter, my 9-year-old daughter will say, when they say, what does your mommy do? She won't say she's an artist or a historian or a program manager. She will say, my mom makes dresses for dead people, which essentially is true. Early on in my practice, believe it or not, even though I'm legally blind, I was in photography. I was fully sighted then. And then I moved into digital and collage and just loved the layers of expanding my creative practice. I was working a full-time job, raising a family, and doing my art on the side. And I will tell you this, that receiving my diagnosis, I have a rare genetic eye condition that's gradually leading to blindness ultimately. That could have been the one thing that was shared that would have just shut everything down, quite frankly. But I fundamentally believe, and if you will make room for this, that sometimes the toughest news is not just tough news. If you shift your lens, it is an opportunity to really reevaluate what is serving you, what should be released, and to create new areas of opportunity. My diagnosis gave me the courage to actually begin presenting my work. I had been creating for years. I was a musical kid. I was that theater kid. I was in the arts my entire life and was very supported by my family. But I did not consider doing this as a career until I got my diagnosis. So that literally gave me the courage to do this work. And at 41, I launched my practice, and everyone thought, this is insane, but do the thing. And every year that we had the courage to do this work, with the support of my wonderful husband, Sean, and many family members and friends, we have made national news every year doing this work, centering lesser-known stories. So I want to encourage someone today that maybe has been going through a tough spot and let you know that the news you receive is simply the news you receive. How it is interpreted, how it is presented, and how it is utilized ultimately is up to you. So I wanted to share that because in the work that we'll see in a few minutes when we go for the tour, you will actually see how I am both documenting these stories, this new research, honoring people's lives, but also honoring this shift in my vision as well. And as someone who loves doing fiber-based period rooms, I hope that when you go into the space today, you really feel as if you are transported into another space and you feel a sense of kinship and comfort with these amazing women and the children. This is the first show that we're actually honoring children as well, which is near and dear to my heart. So I wanted to say that because Sandy is special in that when we go to places to do shows, because we want to support locally, we engage local caterers, we engage local businesses, and we go to thrift shops to purchase formerly used things for the shows. And then I accent those things with the art that I make. So when I mentioned that to Eric, I was like, recommend a thrift shop. He gave me a host of thrift shops. I was like, y'all are thrift shop heavy over here. I'm not judging, but it's a lot of people with some old stuff and disposable income. Okay, I respect them. So, and then he was just like, but wait, what are you looking for? Because I have a dear friend that you should meet. And I was like, okay, I'm open. I said, does she have a few thrifted things, a few old things? And his whole face contorted. And he said, yes, she does. And at a moment's notice, Sandy welcomed us and we went over and she had so many beautiful things. So the dishes that are actually in the period room come from her family. And the linens are also a part of her family, the hand-stitched linens. So I just wanted you all to know that. She also told me to acknowledge her husband, but only to do so by referring to him as the boss. So I wanted to do that. I also want to acknowledge Joe Mazza and Teresa Mazza with Reanimate. They're the people actually capturing the video for today, the energy for today. Deeply appreciative. And lastly, but of course not least, my husband and my daughter Zoe, who helped me install yesterday. And Shauna's been doing this work with me for about 15 years. So as you can tell, I'm the granddaughter of a Baptist preacher. You have to do all your acknowledgments first. You have to be centered and honored. And now let's get into this story. So at this time, I'd like for everyone to get super, super comfortable. Just make sure you're comfortable, that you feel supported, and know that you feel seen, because that is the intention for today. You will be seen. Something that you have been carrying will be released, ideally, if you allow yourself to release it. Something that you are looking to get today, you will get if you have an openness of heart. This is my assurance to you. So at this time, I'd like for everyone just to sit and breathe very deeply and enjoy this song. The soundtrack for the show was provided by my mother's acoustic band from Louisiana. And the songs you hear when you go to the space were also courtesy of her. So we're going to listen to a little bit of Peace in the Valley. I grew up hearing this in Louisiana, and it felt so appropriate to listen to it today in the Valley.
Well, I'm tired and so weary, but I must toil on till the Lord comes and calls me away, where the morning is bright and the lamp is alight and the night is as black as the sea. There will be peace in the valley for me someday. There will be peace in the valley for me. Lord, I pray there'll be no sadness, no sorrow, no trouble. I see there will be peace in the valley for me. Now the bear will be gentle and the wolves will be tame, and the lion shall lay down with the lamb, and the beast of the wild shall be led by a child, and I'll be changed from the creature I am. There will be peace in the valley for me someday. There will be peace in the valley for me. Lord, I pray there'll be no sadness, no sorrow, no trouble will I see. There will be peace in the valley for me.
Thank you, Mama. Peace in the valley, peace in the valley. So today we're going to go on a little journey back to 1860. And we're going to explore and honor and center the lives of two women. Originally, when we started planning this show, I was in conversation with Eric and I said, you know, this show has to make sense for me because I'm an artist, but I'm a storyteller and a historian, and it has to make sense And when Eric said, I want you all to bring the show to Fort Garland, I said, but do you have people of color who served? He said, we do. We do. So to set the stage for today's show, I have to share a little bit about how it came to be. 5 years ago, I was doing a show, and it traveled to New Orleans. And as someone who is from Louisiana and who loves New Orleans and gumbo, I am always a fan of going back, and my husband's from New Orleans as well. So it's an opportunity to see family and connect and do all the things. So we had a touring show because the nature of our business, Duplessis Art, is that we are based in beautiful Colorado. And essentially we travel about 3 or 4 months a year upon invitation to share shows. And they're all historically inspired. And they're all centered in community and the beauty of community. So we were carrying a show. And at the time, I had not yet been to the Whitney Plantation. Has anyone here been to the Whitney Plantation outside New Orleans? Yes, yes, yes. It is one of the world's foremost authorities on the history and preservation and presentation of slavery in our country, in early American history. And it's an extraordinary place that was an actual working plantation, believe it or not, until the 1970s. Please allow that to soak in. I know. So, with that said, I had a colleague who was working as education coordinator at the Whitney and came to my show in the Warehouse District and was deeply moved and said, I'd like for you to come to the Whitney. And I said, I know, I've been meaning to go. So I went on this research trip and I told my husband, I said, I have to prepare myself for what we're going to see. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I really believe that we're going to see something that is going to be deeply moving and deeply encouraging. And it was. So we toured the grounds. And for most people who tour plantations, the highlight for them is the main house, because they have become well acquainted with the romanticized notion of how our country operated many, many years ago. And while there are versions of that that may be true, the reality is that for many, many people, there were no occasions of sipping iced tea and lemonade on the front porch or making dresses from curtains for balls. There was hard, unwavering labor. And for women, particularly women who were enslaved, them and their children, it was an all-encompassing and exhausting experience. The average person who was enslaved at those plantations in the South did not live beyond their 20s because of the rigors, because of the everyday work, because of the conditions, because of all the things. So when you think about the women that we are honoring today, they are in their 20s. And after a few weeks of research, we lose track of them. That is not uncommon. Either they are sold or they meet an unfortunate end. So we were at the plantation in New Orleans, and we'd seen everything. She was so kind and intentional. We were there for 2 or 3 hours. We were swooning. It was New Orleans. It was hot. There were mosquitoes. Our forehead was wet. It was all the things. And our poor daughter, Zoe, who was about 5 at the time, kept saying, when is this going to be over? And then I looked at my husband, and he looked as if he wanted to say, when is this going to be over? Like, I got no answers for you, kid. This is all your mom. So right before we called it off and went to the car, I asked the coordinator if there was any place that had deep significance for her, having worked there for years. She said, honestly, yeah, and I'll show you. So I was thinking it was the slave quarters, because the original slave quarters still exist on their property. It was actually the kitchen. And she took me to what would have been their kitchen. And there was a huge hearth in the middle of the kitchen. And all I could think of is being in New Orleans as someone who went to college in New Orleans, knowing that literally in the summer, it's 103 and the humidity is through the roof, and just having to toil and work over this hearth and move and be in this heat. And all I could think about was potentially the measure of discomfort that these women endured. So I told her that I wanted to have a tour of that space, and we did. And I saw instruments and tools and all the things that really represented their innovation and ingenuity of these women. Because keep in mind, there was no King Soopers, so they were growing and sourcing and catching and cutting and doing all the things for 3 meals a day. And then we walk outside, and there's this huge cauldron which is not uncommon on this plantation because it was a sugar plantation, so those exist all across. I said, oh, was this for the sugar? Were they doing something with the sugar? She said, no, no, no. This is actually for the linens. To which I responded, what do you mean, the linens? She goes, the tablecloths. To which I responded, what do you mean, the tablecloths? To which she replied, oh, they had formal dinners. I said, they? She said, the people in the main house would take dinner and breakfast and supper. I said, wait, where's lunch? She said, no, 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 remember, lunch comes later in the 1900s when people started moving into factories and packing things to take with them. They would have a breakfast, they would have a supper, which is a larger meal, and then they'd have something a little in the evening. But it is important to know, for the purposes of today, that it included 12 courses. So then I said, surely you are mistaken. Because as a mom of one, sometimes one course is a task. She said 12 courses, and these 12 courses required 12 tablecloths. There was an expectation for every course that there be a new, clean, pristine tablecloth to lay on the table and present the meal. This is whether they had company or whether they were dining alone. And I said, how are the women keeping up with this kind of demand? She said, they are cooking, they are cleaning, they are in the heat, they are washing, and sometimes in lye, in boiling water, these linens. And all I could think of in that moment is what discomfort these women must have been enduring, all while trying to preserve some measure of comfort for the persons living in the main house. And then also I was wondering, quite frankly, what they were eating for 12 courses. I was thinking that as well. So we left, and we got in the car, and as we were riding back the 45 minutes to New Orleans, I was very quiet. This is important because if you know me, I'm rarely quiet. And my husband asked me about 30 minutes in, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. And he said, you've been quiet. I said, I know. And he said, was it something you saw? I said, it was everything that I saw. But most importantly, it was the talk of the tablecloths. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I have to do something with it. And so for the next 3 years, we worked and traveled and had shows. And every time I would visit a new place, a new space, engage with a beautiful community partner, I would be quietly looking to see if it was the home for 12 tablecloths. And it just never really seemed right. It wasn't until we went to visit, at Eric's introduction and urging, the Center for Colorado Women's History to present our cafe show, to travel there. And at the end of talking to Susan Fries, who is their fearless, beautiful director, she says to me, an artist, the question that every artist dreams, you got anything new you're working on? Anything? I said, new? Anything new, never been done before, experimental? And my face just lit up. I said, well, I have been carrying this show called 12 Tablecloths. And she said, oh, tell me more, because it's a historic house museum. So this fell right in line. And unbeknownst to me, they had been looking for ways to really kind of reclaim their space and make it more centered on the fullness of what it means to be a woman in Colorado. So the timing was perfect. And I told her about traveling to New Orleans and going through and the 12 tablecloths and the dishes and the discomfort and this, all the things. And then I told her I'd been carrying it for 3 years. And she said, really? I said, yes. She said, well, do you know what you want to do for the show? I said, I absolutely do. I said, it came to me a year ago. And she said, well, what is it? I said, I could not figure out how to present this story. I didn't know how to do it justice and how to honor these women who lived these lives until one night I had a dream. And in the dream, I was walking with my daughter back into the museum. And we walk in, and the women are sitting at the table. The women who have served were sitting at the table. And I was serving them. And I woke up. I remember it was 3 a.m. in the morning, and I told my husband, "Get up, I'm serving them." To which he replied, "Wait, what are we doing?" And I said, "Don't worry about it. I got the idea for the show. I'm going downstairs." And he's like, inaudible. So I go downstairs, and in 30 minutes, I sketch out the entire show. I have the table. I have the idea. We'll choose 5 women from the Whitney Plantation. They'll be served. They'll be supported. So I'm telling Susan all of this. And I said, "Oh, wait, but does that make sense for here?" She said, "Well, why would you say that?" I said, "Because the family that lived here did not have people of color serving here, to my knowledge." She said, "People of color didn't serve in the house. They were not allowed in the house." And I was like, "Tell me more." She said, "But they did have a chauffeur and they did have a washerwoman." I said, "Oh, tell me more." So she told me about Miss Myrtle, who served there for over a decade, and how Miss Myrtle was the laundress. She would come in and do laundry 6 days a week, and during that time was never even allowed to enter the house. So I told her, oh, here is our connection. Because as someone who is a student of history and who loves history deeply, I know that we have a tendency in our country to quietly, neatly pack slavery and oppression and harmful things just at the bottom of the country in the Southeast. Sometimes we package it up with a little bow. But the reality is, if you know history as I do, our entire country was built upon the foundation of free labor. The Denver Mint was bankrolled with the spoils from tobacco and rice and cotton and sugar and indigo. This is who we are. And when I say that in community, it is not to make anyone feel bad or embarrassed or upset or concerned. It is to extend to you this beautiful notion that if we don't begin sharing and honoring who we are, it is going to be really challenging for us to move forward. In this season, where there's such an intentional effort, for whatever reason, to dismantle, to erase, and to move away from honoring Black and Indigenous stories in our foundational history, I smile broadly in the midst of that confusion and angst and tell you, I know something that's really beautiful and true. And if you'd like, I'll share it with you. Because Black people are so foundational to the United States of America, there is possibly no way that our contribution could ever be dismantled. It is seen in the foods that we eat, that were grown and cultivated and presented. It is in the jazz, country, rock and roll, R&B, hip hop, and roots music you enjoy on the weekend. Thank you, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, founder of rock and roll, little known history fact. I always have to shout her out. Inspiration for Elvis and the British invasion. Google it. It is also in innovation. The entire field of gynecology was the result of harmful experience conducted on Black women in the South without their consent. It is innovation. It is science. It is your cell phone. It is your security system. It is your refrigerator. It is so many things that people of color have done and contributed in so many extraordinary ways that's often minimized. Additionally, it is that wet nurse that served for years nursing the children of her owner's wife because the owner's wife did not want to contort her body for the task. Even in my own family, we have heard stories of great aunts who bore 3 children but nursed literally 40. And this was not uncommon, not only in the South. So as we birthed and bore the movement as women, but also literally nursed from our very bodies and created this notion that in just a few years, with a few orders, you can dismantle all of that, is not based in truth. We are deeply connected. We are community. And that should not make you uncomfortable. That should give you a sense of encouragement because we are deeply resilient and very powerful together. When you think of these things, allow these things to encourage you. Allow these things to pique your curiosity. And as we move through the show today, I want you to know that while this is the 3rd offering of 12 tablecloths, this offering was mindfully and lovingly created just for you and just for these women. We'll be honoring Josephine Stein today and her 2-year-old daughter, Arabella. And when I talked to Eric about who to honor for the show, he sent me the information on them. And I thought to myself, this is wonderful. Josephine was Black, and her daughter was mulatto. And for a little bit of time, in working with Ani Steele, who was our research assistant, an extraordinary human and scholar, currently working towards her PhD in Texas, she kept telling me in our weekly meetings, Chloe, I believe that when they served and lived at Fort Garland, that Josephine's child may be the child of the gentleman she was serving. He was here as well, and his wife was also 26, and they had a 4-year-old child. And that would have been the norm. Not okay, but also the norm. But upon more research, we began to realize, based upon the information and the traveling patterns, that Josephine and Arabella both had roots in Arkansas. Well, who traveled to Arkansas around the same time that she would have been pregnant with little Arabella? It wasn't the gentleman who was serving here. Plot twist, it was actually his father. His father was also in the military in Missouri and traveled to that area around the same time, and also had a half-sister that he loved deeply named Arabella. This is interesting because you don't often see enslaved people with names like Arabella. So we believe, based upon what we found, that Arabella may potentially be the child of the father of the gentleman who was serving here, and that she may actually have the name of his aunt. And so we started looking at that, and we tried to follow them. We lost track of them, but all we know for sure is that they had the roots in Arkansas. They lived and served here, and while she was serving here, she was cooking and cleaning and doing the daily work, and she was, for all purposes, someone who was enslaved. When you talk about enslavement in Colorado, you get a lot of different reactions. My primary day job is working with the Colorado Black Equity Study. I'm the program manager for History Colorado, and it is a 2-year study that actually honors and evaluates harms from days of territory to present day. And one of the things that we identified within the first 2 weeks of being on the job in December 2 years ago was that enslavement did exist in Colorado. Now, it wasn't gone with the wind, sweeping, moving. There was no iced tea, but it did exist. When you think about all the ways that people charted their fortune and came here because of gold rush, it is unrealistic to believe that they came without the people that they owned. It's true. So they came here because of gold rush. They packed supplies and materials, and then they also packed enslaved people. And oftentimes when they left, they also took enslaved people back with them. So that's how we kind of see it happen for people of color. And that's how they're coming to this space. Specifically for Josephine and her young daughter, unless they had a really strong, committed relationship with the family they traveled to serve, more than likely they came, and they may have also have been on foot. We've often heard of Clara Brown, who actually walked here. She was an elder in that season. I don't know about you, sometimes walking from the living room to the refrigerator is a task. So walking many, many states over and then founding businesses in Denver and surrounding areas is quite extraordinary, especially as an elder. And when I looked that up in terms of why that would happen, you have a lot of people traveling to this region for gold rush to chart their fortune. And almost always the persons who are enslaved are not allowed to ride. They are literally walking on foot, and sometimes they are barefoot. And please allow that to be in your spirit. So I wanted to center what that would feel like. And I wanted to center a little bit of the backstory before we head on over to the space. I also want to share with you, I'll be talking in the space about their daily lives and their contributions and how they were able to show up. The other 2 persons that we'll be honoring is a woman named Courtney. This is really exciting because Eric emailed me a few days later and said, I have some information about another woman. I said, okay, who is she? He said her name was Courtney. She had 2 boys, and she was enslaved. I said, oh, at Fort Garland too? He said, no. John Garland, General John Garland, for whom this very fort was named for, owned enslaved people on a number of occasions throughout his life. And we were able to confirm that he also owned Courtney and her 2 boys. Now keep in mind, during the period of time that he owned Courtney and her 2 young boys, he was in Virginia and it was illegal. But that's not the part that should really be concerning. The part that is concerning, even more so, is that we were able to document through one of Eric's colleagues, a scholar, by viewing the actual payment vouchers that dear old Mr. Garland not only enslaved Courtney and her 2 boys, they were cooking and cleaning and working and providing support for him, but he was able to receive from the U.S. military a subsidy, a payment voucher, and he was receiving $5 a month for Courtney every single month for her service. Now keep in mind, this is illegal, but the military is literally paying him $5 a month for his enslaved peoples to support them. And ideally, that would have gone to her. But Mr. Garland saw fit to pocket the money. History is complicated and can be very messy. But in exploring those things, we honor our humanity. Nobody is one thing completely. And even though we all make decisions that completely alter our lives and our past and are deeply connected to other people, it's important that we recognize that when we talk about these things, we have an opportunity to create a sense of restoration. And when you know, it's really hard to not know. A few years later, he sold Courtney and her 2 boys to a fur trader. And let me tell you what Courtney did. Courtney decided to sue for her freedom and was granted her freedom a few years later for her and one of her sons. We lose track of the other son, so I'm not sure what happened to him. But she did have a positive outcome to our knowledge. So as we talk about all the things that people have done that have been unkind or potentially harmful, it's also important to talk about the things that people have done in the midst of really tough circumstances that demonstrate just how strong and courageous they are. And so I want to end today's talk here before we go across the way to the actual space by centering the energy and theme of hope. I know in the times in which we are all collectively living and experiencing, it feels a lot harder sometimes to connect to hope. But I want to submit to you, regardless of how you came to this space, whether you are indigenous to this land, you came by boat, you came of your own accord through your ancestors, I know that there is hope within you. And I know this because your ancestors had hope. Because let's be truthful, if you are a student of history, some people had it tougher than others, but quite frankly, history is just pretty crappy the further you go back. Can we be in agreement? I mean, like no indoor plumbing, like all the things. It's pretty crappy for a couple hundred years. So here's the thing. There's no internet, there's no tech, there's no support, there's no real intentional community beyond just bartering for systems for existence. But our ancestors, yours and mine, kept going, and they had no true assurance beyond their faith that things would get better, but they hoped that they would. And the reason I know this is to be true, it's because you're here. You are the physical manifestation of their hope. You sitting right here, whether you're paying attention to me or planning on how to get back up here and get some more refreshments, or if you're slightly curious about what's going on in the other room, whatever space you're in right now, if you were able to get here on your own, you woke up this morning with knowledge of who you are, your name, your loved ones, you're able to care for yourself, you have access to food and a safe place to stay, you should have a measure of gratitude and be grateful. And I just want us to center hope as we move through this space today. And at this time, we will take a brief break. We'll head over. I'll allow maybe 5 or 10 minutes for you to walk through the installation. You can take photographs, and then we'll go and I'll give a quick 15-minute overview of the pieces and the inspiration for the show. And then I'll have a Q&A, and we'll have closing remarks by Eric. And I just want you all to know that I hope that this show touches you very, very deeply. We put a lot of heart into it. And I hope that you somehow feel deeply connected to these women who literally lived and served here. Thank you.
From the close I smell from up and down, and still somehow it's cloud illusion.